For years, the truth stayed hidden, the victims forgotten, the cases left cold, until science revealed what time could not. This is Decades in the Dark, where cold cases are brought back to light. On December 26, 1996, the body of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was found inside her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. She had not been abducted. She had not been taken away in the night. She had been killed in the basement of the house where she slept. Nearly 30 years later, this case remains unsolved. Not because it lacks suspects, theories, or attention, but because every explanation breaks somewhere when it collides with the physical evidence. To understand why, you have to understand the house. The Ramsey home was not a simple layout. It was large, multi-level, and built in stages over many decades. Rooms were added and repurposed. Staircases did not align logically. Hallways narrowed unexpectedly. Doors opened into rooms that felt disconnected from the rest of the house. The basement, in particular, was unlike most suburban homes. It was not a single open space. It was divided into multiple rooms connected by narrow corridors. There was a boiler room, a laundry area, storage rooms, and at the far end, a small interior room sometimes referred to as a wine cellar. That room had no windows. It was dark, cluttered, and not visible from the main basement area. You would not wander into it accidentally. You had to know it was there, or spend time exploring. Even people who visited the house later said it was easy to feel turned around inside it. This matters, because everything that happened that night happened inside this structure. According to family statements, the Ramseys returned home late on Christmas night after attending a holiday gathering. JonBenet was reportedly asleep in the car. She was carried upstairs and put into her bed. What happened after that moment was not seen by anyone. Everything that follows is reconstruction. At some point during the night, JonBenet left her bedroom, or was removed from it. There is one detail that strongly suggests JonBenet may not have slept through the night. During the autopsy, undigested pineapple was found in her stomach. That matters because pineapple digests relatively quickly. This indicated she had eaten it not long before her death. A bowl of pineapple was later found on the kitchen table. Fingerprints on that bowl belonged to Patsy Ramsey and Burke Ramsey. Both parents, however, said JonBenet had not been fed after returning home, and that she went straight to bed. The pineapple introduced a quiet but significant contradiction. It suggested JonBenet was awake at some point during the night, and that something happened before the violence began. When her body was later found, she was wearing different clothing than what she had been put to bed in. That suggests she was changed or redressed after she went to sleep. There were no signs of a violent struggle in her bedroom. No overturned furniture, no broken objects, no blood, no screams reported by anyone in the house. Then came the first act of violence. JonBenet suffered a massive blow to the head, possibly with a heavy-duty flashlight. The force fractured her skull and caused internal bleeding, but it did not immediately break the skin. This detail is critical. Medical experts agree this injury would have rendered her unconscious very quickly. She would not have been able to cry out. She would not have fought back, and she did not die from this injury alone. Experts believe there was a gap, possibly 40 minutes to an hour, between the head injury and her death. That gap changes everything. During this period, JonBenet was alive but likely unconscious. At some point during that window, she was moved to the basement. To get from her bedroom to the basement interior room required navigating staircases, hallways, and multiple basement sections. This was not a straight path. It required intention. There is often mention of a broken window in this case, and it's important to clarify what that actually means. The basement window was not broken during the crime. John Ramsey later acknowledged that he had broken it months earlier after locking himself out of the house. That window had a window well and went directly into the basement. While there were no clear signs the window was disturbed the night JonBenet was killed, its existence meant investigators could never completely rule out an intruder entering the home, or someone entering earlier and remaining inside. The window became less a piece of evidence and more a permanent question mark. Then came the second, fatal act. JonBenet was strangled using a cord tied to a makeshift handle fashioned from a broken paintbrush. The paintbrush belonged to Patsy Ramsey and had been taken from a tray stored in the basement. This device functioned as a garrote. As pressure was applied, the cord tightened around her neck. Medical examiners concluded the strangulation occurred after the head injury. This means the crime unfolded in stages. It was not a single impulsive blow, it was an escalation. JonBenet's wrists were loosely bound with cord. The bindings were not tight enough to restrain her. Investigators have long described them as symbolic rather than functional. This has fueled debate for decades. Were they staging? Were they meant to suggest kidnapping? Or were they simply the actions of someone who didn't know what they were doing? There was also evidence of sexual injury. JonBenet suffered vaginal trauma consistent with penetration by a foreign object, possibly part of the paintbrush. There were also findings that suggested prior vaginal irritation, though experts have never reached consensus on whether this represented chronic abuse or injuries sustained during the assault itself. This is one of the most disturbing and uncomfortable aspects of the case, and one of the most debated. After JonBenet was strangled, her body was left in the small basement room. A blanket was placed over her. Her favorite nightgown was found nearby. Some interpret these details as signs of remorse. Others see them as staging. Others see ritual or confusion. Then came the ransom note. The note was nearly 3 pages long, far longer than typical ransom notes. It was written on paper from inside the house using a pen from inside the house. A practice note was found in the same pad. The ransom amount demanded was $118,000, nearly identical to John Ramsey's recent bonus. The note warned the family not to contact police. It promised a phone call. That call never came. The tone shifted repeatedly, threatening, polite, cinematic. It referenced lines similar to action movies. Some experts described it as theatrical. Others described it as someone trying to sound like a criminal rather than someone who actually was one. Handwriting experts were deeply divided. Some believed Patsy Ramsey could not be ruled out as the author. Others strongly disagreed. No definitive conclusion was reached. On the morning of December 26th, Patsy Ramsey reported finding the note on the back staircase, a staircase she commonly used. Police were called immediately, despite the note's warnings. Friends were invited over. A victim advocate arrived. People moved freely through the house. Doors were opened. Items were touched. The home was never sealed as a crime scene. This decision alone permanently altered the investigation. Hours later, John Ramsey searched the house again. He went directly to the basement. He opened the door to the interior room and found JonBenet's body. He carried her upstairs. By that moment, any remaining uncontaminated context was gone. The investigation fractured almost immediately. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office clashed publicly. Media leaks shaped public opinion. The Ramseys became the focus of suspicion. And this is where the suspects and theories take hold. The intruder theory suggests someone entered the home, possibly through an unlocked door or basement window, waited inside, and killed JonBenet. Supporters point to unidentified DNA, the broken window, and the garrote. But it struggles to explain the ransom note, the lack of theft, and the navigation of the house. The Ramsey parent theory suggests an accident or act of violence inside the family followed by staging. It focuses on the ransom note, lack of forced entry, and behavior after the crime. But it requires prolonged silence under intense scrutiny, with no conclusive forensic proof. The sibling theory suggests JonBenet's brother caused the head injury, with adults staging the scene afterward. Investigators rejected this theory, and no physical evidence supports it, but it persists publicly. The known but not family theory suggests someone familiar with the Ramseys and the house. It explains familiarity, but lacks a viable suspect. Then, in 2006, the case took a dramatic turn. A man named John Mark Carr, living overseas, confessed. He was arrested in Thailand and extradited to the US. Media coverage exploded. But the confession collapsed. His DNA did not match. He got key details wrong. There was no evidence he was ever in Boulder. He was released. And once again, the case slipped back into uncertainty. Later, during civil proceedings tied to defamation cases, jurors were taken to the Ramsey house. They walked the layout, the staircases, the basement, the interior room. Several reportedly remarked on how confusing the house was, and how easy it would be to miss that room entirely. Perspective changed. Answers did not. What makes this case endure is not just its brutality, but its contradictions. A crime that appears both panicked and deliberate. Evidence that points inward and outward at the same time. JonBenét Ramsey's case may never be solved. Not because the truth doesn't exist, but because it may be buried beneath contamination, early mistakes, and time. And nearly 30 years later, we are still standing in that house, looking down those staircases, trying to understand how something so violent could happen in a place meant to be safe. This is Decades in the Dark, where science brings the past to light. Subscribe for more stories where justice never expires.